A name can carry centuries of memory. It can hold the pride of a civilization, the weight of conquest, and the quiet, stubborn hope of a people who refuse to be forgotten. Few names carry more weight than the one we're exploring today. For most of recorded history, the land we now call Iran was known to the outside world by an entirely different name: Persia. Say that word, and images flood the mind. Towering stone pillars, magnificent royal courts, vast armies moving like shadows across deserts, poets writing verses that still echo 1,000 years later, carpets woven with a precision that told entire stories in thread and color. Persia was not just a country, it was an idea, a symbol of one of the most extraordinary civilizations in the ancient world. But in 1935, the government made an unusual and deliberate request to the entire world. Stop calling us Persia. Use a different name. Iran. This was a civilization reclaiming its own voice. Today, we're going to trace that journey back to the very beginning. We'll follow the rise of the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great, the man who built the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. Way back, to a high, wind-swept plateau, a place where ancient tribes learned to survive harsh winters and scorching summers. These were the early ancestors of the Iranian peoples, nomadic groups who migrated onto the plateau around the 2nd millennium BCE. Among them were various related tribes, including the Persians. In the 7th century BCE, they were subjects living under the Median Empire, and the man who changed everything was Cyrus II, known to history as Cyrus the Great. Born into the royal family of Anshan, Cyrus did not begin as a world conqueror. He was a regional king, a local ruler. Around 550 BCE, Cyrus launched a revolt against the Median king. It was a rebellion that, by all logic, should have been crushed. Instead, it succeeded. Cyrus defeated the Medes and absorbed their empire. But rather than destroying it, he incorporated it. He kept Median nobles in power and respected local customs. This pragmatic, inclusive approach would define everything he did next. Within decades, his armies pushed west into Lydia. Then, in 539 BCE, Cyrus marched into one of the greatest cities on earth, Babylon. With his fall largely peaceful, Cyrus became the ruler of the largest empire the world had ever seen. The Achaemenid Empire had begun. Say those words slowly and feel what they mean. At its height, this empire stretched from the shores of the Aegean Sea in the west to the Indus Valley in the east, from the steppes of Central Asia in the north to the deserts of Egypt and Libya in the south. It governed over 40 million people, dozens of languages, hundreds of cultures, multiple religions, all of them, remarkably, permitted to exist under Achaemenid rule. This was not how empires typically behaved in the ancient world. Most conquerors of that era destroyed what they defeated. They tore down temples, enslaved populations, erased local identities. Cyrus did the opposite. When he entered Babylon, he issued what historians now call the Cyrus Cylinder, a declaration that he would respect the gods, the customs, and the freedoms of the peoples he ruled. He even allowed the Jewish exiles held captive in Babylon to return to their homeland. To the peoples of the ancient Near East, Cyrus was not an oppressor. He was a liberator. And yet, here's the fascinating historical irony at the heart of today's story. The very civilization that Cyrus built was about to receive an entirely different name from an entirely different world, a name given not by its rulers or its people, but by its rivals, the Greeks. To understand this, we need to understand what Persia meant to the Greek world. To the Greeks, Persia was the ultimate symbol of what they called barbaros, the foreign, the other, the unknown. Greek historians, philosophers, and playwrights wrote endlessly about Persia. Herodotus devoted enormous portions of his work to them, and the name they used came from the region where Cyrus had originally come from, Persis. In Greek, the people of that region were the Persai. In Latin, the name became Persia. It was a regional name applied to an entire civilization. In 490 BCE, the Persian king, Darius I, launched a massive military campaign against the Greek mainland. His armies crossed the Aegean They met the Athenians at a place called Marathon. Against overwhelming odds, the Athenian forces held their ground. The Persian army was repelled. 10 years later, Darius's son, Xerxes, the first assembled one of the largest armies the ancient world had ever seen. At a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae, 300 Spartan warriors stood in their path. Athens was captured and burned. Yet the tide turned at sea at the Battle of Salamis. Xerxes watched from a throne set on a hillside. He watched his empire's campaign collapse before his eyes until one man arrived who would bring the entire Achaemenid structure crashing down. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed into Persian territory. Within 7 years, he had conquered virtually the entire empire. He defeated Persian forces at Gaugamela, where the Persian king Darius III fled the battlefield and defeated. In 330 BCE, Alexander entered Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the empire, and he burned it. The Achaemenid Empire, the empire of Cyrus, Darius, and Xerxes, was over. That is perhaps the one truth history teaches us more consistently than any other. No matter how vast the territory, no matter how sophisticated the administration, no matter how magnificent the capital cities, the palaces, the roads, and the armas, every empire that has ever existed has eventually ended. The Achaemenid Empire ended with fire and a Macedonian conqueror. But here's what makes the story of Iran genuinely extraordinary. The civilization did not end with the empire. This is a crucial difference that history sometimes glosses over. We tend to think of empires and civilizations as the same thing. When one collapses, we assume the other dies with it. But the people of the Iranian plateau had something deeper than any single dynasty. They had a language, a literature, a way of seeing the world, a cultural identity so resilient that it survived wave after wave of foreign conquest and emerged, each time, recognizably itself. That story begins in the aftermath of Alexander. After Alexander's death in 323 BCE, his empire fragmented among his generals. The Iranian plateau eventually fell under the rule of the Seleucid dynasty Greek rulers, governing Persian lands. For a time, Greek culture spread across the region. Cities were renamed. Greek became a language of administration and trade. It seemed, to some observers, as though Persian identity might slowly dissolve into the broader Hellenistic world. It did not. Around 247 BCE, a new Iranian power rose in the northeastern regions of the plateau. Originally, a nomadic people from the steppes, the Parthians built an empire that eventually stretched from the Euphrates River to eastern Iran. They were skilled horsemen, shrewd diplomats, and formidable warriors. And for nearly 5 centuries, the Parthian Empire stood as one of the great powers of the ancient world. Their most famous adversary, Rome. Where Persia had once clashed with Greece, Iran now clashed with Rome. The two empires fought repeatedly across the deserts of Mesopotamia. The Romans called their eastern rival Parthia, but to the people living within it, the identity was still rooted in that ancient Iranian heritage. Persian language and culture persisted beneath the Hellenistic surface. And when the Parthian dynasty eventually weakened, it was replaced by another Iranian dynasty. In 224 CE, Ardashir defeated the last Parthian king. They saw themselves as the true heirs of the Achaemenid. The Sasanian Empire became one of the most sophisticated states. Their capital, Ctesiphon, was among the largest cities on earth. Their art, intricate metalwork, elaborate rock carvings, magnificent textiles reflected a culture operating at the height of its powers. They elevated Zoroastrianism as the state faith. They built grand fire temples. They patronized scholars, physicians, and philosophers. And they fought Rome, and later Byzantium, in a rivalry that would last for centuries. For over 400 years, the Sasanian Empire endured. But by the early 7th century CE, something had changed. On the Arabian Peninsula, a new faith was spreading with extraordinary speed. Islam Arab armies swept out of Arabia with a force that shocked the ancient world. The Sasanian Empire collapsed entirely by 651 CE. Too many observers at the time. This must have seemed like the end of Iranian civilization. It was not. What happened next is a remarkable transformation. The people adopted Islam, and it became woven into the fabric of Iranian identity. But they did not abandon what they already were. The Persian language survived, enriched with Arabic vocabulary, written in a new script. Persian culture was not merely surviving inside the Islamic world. It was shaping it. Persian poets, scientists, and philosophers became central figures. Scholars like Avicenna wrote foundational texts in medicine and philosophy. And then came the poets. Ferdowsi composed the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, preserving the myths and history of ancient Iran. After Ferdowsi came Rumi, whose poetry on love and the divine has been beloved across the world for 8 centuries. Persian became the prestige language of courts from Istanbul to Delhi. Mughal emperors in India conducted their administration in Persian. A civilization that had lost its empire had conquered half the known world through its culture. Through Arab conquests and Mongol invasions, one thread held constant. The people called their homeland by the same ancient name. Iran, not Persia, not the name the Greeks had given them. Iran, the land of the Aryans, rooted in the oldest layers of their language and identity. The outside world still wrote Persia on its maps. But inside the culture, the poetry, and the prayers, the name had never really changed at all.